Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Lankford, you're recognized for your question.
Chairman, thank you. Thanks to all of our witnesses in this conversation. Let me get the human side of this as well. Because the more you pull on people to say you've got to give us every scrap of every piece, the more you incentivize people to work off the record because they want to have private conversations. These are human beings as well. Regardless of the administration, their perspective, every administration is looking for a way that we can actually just talk to each other without having to have everything that we have get pulled into this record. Whether it's Hillary Clinton in her private server, whether it's others that are trying to be able to pull in to be able to say, I've got to find some way to be able to have off-the-record conversations for things, or what it was Gmail originally with multiple administrations now, or was now messaging apps to be able to make messages disappear. My question to you is a larger, broader question. How do we process through a private conversation, that is a purely private conversation between two peers or two individuals, or even the president and his staff, that's a private conversation and a public conversation? Or would you define it as you're the president, you're on the president's staff, everything you have should be actually gathered, you have no such thing as a private life? Ms. Wiseman, you want to start with that? Mr. Turley, you want to jump in?
Yes, well, the Presidential Records Act itself defines presidential record very broadly. And essentially, you're correct. The president has no private life. That is, as long as the president is acting in an official, constitutional, or ceremonial capacity, the records that are generated must be preserved. Now, I think the degree to which a president or an agency official can have a private conversation or keep certain records confidential is a separate issue that should be kept separate from the issue of preservation. Because if you don't even have preservation, issues about potential privileges fall out altogether. But I think the Presidential Records Act, at its heart, recognizes that because someone is the president, everything they do and say is relevant and important and needs to be preserved unless they are acting in a purely personal capacity, a letter to a grandchild, for example, or in a purely political way. They're head of their political party. Those records are not preserved under the PRA, but otherwise it's all fair game.
Right. Mr. Turley, my question just is this defined overly broad? It actually encourages people to be able to push outside the box.
Well, it is exceptionally broad. It was designed to be broad, to have the natural default towards preservation. But I think your point is well taken, and more importantly, the Supreme Court views your point is well taken. I mean, the Supreme Court has repeatedly said that there is a danger when you chill communications in the White House. This isn't for personal stuff. This is just on official material, that you can have a chilling effect on people being willing to be open about issues. When it comes to personal matters, my colleague is correct that technically on a purely personal matter, it is not an official record, but because you are President of the United States, there's very few things that people consider to be entirely personal. The real gatekeeper there for the White House is, in fact, the White House counsel and the archivist who can help sort of delineate those lines to create some breathing space. I do think that it's important not to discount this. That is, yeah, presidents are political animals, but living in a fishbowl on every level of your life is not healthy. And this goes back to what Senator Portman was talking about as well. That is, we have to try at least to create these bright line rules. But I think the key role here is with the White House counsel and the archivist to make that as clear as possible of what subjects can be done without that falling under the PRA.
Right. Well, the clearest example of that is Congress doesn't live under that same rule. None of us here have the rule that we have no document, no scrap of paper, no anything that we have that has to be that can be destroyed, has to be preserved. Congress gets to choose what they're doing as far as what's private and what's public on that. That doesn't seem to be so with the executive branch. And what I'm trying to figure out is how do we create a system where we're incentivizing the preservation of records because people want to know, they want to study it, they want to look back on history. All of us are still upset with Martha Washington for burning every one of those papers 250 years ago. We get that. But there is a whole series of things that are also dealing with the humanity of people that we also have to acknowledge on this and try to figure out how to be able to create a system where we're incentivizing keeping records rather than incentivizing actually trying to be able to work outside the system on a long term. We have a challenge here with Congress as well in trying to be able to get documents from agencies, period, on this. For some reason of late, it's faster to FOIA a record than it is for Congress to actually request a record. That's become a very significant issue where administrations are saying, yes, we have those records, but we're not going to turn those over. But if there's a FOIA record, amazingly of late, the records get turned over to Congress the same day the FOIA is released to an outside entity. That's a separate issue that we've got to be able to determine what happens. I've seen this even in a request that we made. Agencies are creating a new standard for religious accommodation for the vaccines. Well, this has not existed in agencies before, and so they released out on the Federal Register that we're going to keep track of people that work in the federal government, what their religious preference is, and we're going to store that in our records. We're going to request that from individuals and store it in our records. Suddenly now we have a record now that I would assume would be FOIAble at some point, or would become a permanent part of record that people could actually get access to, that has personal information on their religious preferences that gets into the mix of this. So that's a different issue on records, but it becomes a pretty significant issue. Professor Turley, you have a comment on that?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I have another default as a Madisonian scholar, and that is I tend to favor Congress in fights like this. And I totally agree with you that there continues to be a lack of responsiveness, and this is not a Republican or Democratic issue. I don't know how many times I've testified about this. Congress can do more to be aggressive in forcing disclosures. When they have gone to court, they have largely prevailed on asserting their right to information. And I do think that's something we have to look at very closely. I also want to note something else. When you raise the fact that these laws can give sort of perverse incentive for people to go offline, that is well documented. We have previous administrations where officials admitted that they were meeting at Starbucks and finding ways to avoid creating paper records. And so your concern is well founded, I think, in history.
Sharon, thank you.